Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. Focus question. How does courage and determination help you to overcome obstacles? Born into slavery. Long before Harriet Tubman was born, her great-grandmother was seized from her home in Africa. The kidnappers packed Harriet's great-grandmother into a small wooden ship with hundreds of other Africans and sent her to the United States. Once she arrived, the traders who had enslaved her sold her to the owner of a large farm called a plantation. Harriet's great-grandmother was now the human property of a man she had to call master. All of the children and grandchildren were enslaved too. Their enslavers forced them to do hard labor and sometimes punished them cruelly. They received no pay, only meager food and housing that was no better than that of farm animals. Many of them were never taught to read and write. Enslaved people have no freedom to go where they wanted, and sometimes they were not allowed to marry or raise their own children. Members of enslaved families could also be sold to different enslavers, breaking up the family. Dreams of escape. Harriet was born around 1820. Like all enslaved children, she could not run and play. She worked all the time, but sometimes her enslavers whipped her anyway. When she saw them sell two of her sisters, Harriet was terrified that she would also be sold and have to leave her family. Harriet's life was harsh, but she had dreams. People called abolitionists have begun to speak out against the injustice of owning other human beings. Some abolitionists helped enslaved people escape to northern states or to Canada, where slavery was illegal. Harriet dreamed of living as a free woman in the North. Enslaved people went to great lengths to escape to freedom. Some shipped themselves north in boxes. One man, Henry Box Brown, nearly died during his escape when the box he was in turned upside down for hours. Brown made it to Pennsylvania, a free state and freedom, after 26 hours in this box. One light-skinned enslaved woman, Ellen Craft, disguised herself as a sickly white man. The enslaved man who accompanied her was actually her husband, William Craft. The Crafts traveled by train and steamship and reached Philadelphia in December 25, 1848. When she was still a girl, Harriet tried to help an enslaved man who was trying to escape. When the overseer threw a metal weight to stop him, it struck her in the head. Harriet almost died from the wound. For the rest of her life, she had headaches and seizures because of her injury. Years later, Tubman started planning her own escape. She wanted her husband, a free black man, to join her. He refused, but Tubman was determined to become a free woman. One day, Tubman's enslaver died. She knew the people the man had enslaved would be sold. It was time to go. She and two of her brothers ran away, but soon after they left, her brothers turned back. Tubman kept going. Tubman made it to the home of an abolitionist woman who had offered help. The woman fed Tubman, let her sleep, and then directed her to the next safe place. When Tubman reached that house, the people were directed her to her next stop. This secret network of safe homes was called the Underground Railroad. To escape, Tubman walked 100 miles, 160 kilometers alone through unknown land. She traveled at night and hid during the day. Finally, she arrived at the border of Pennsylvania. She was free, leading others to freedom. When Tubman reached freedom, she was overjoyed. There was such a glory over everything, she said when she remembered that day the sun come like gold through the trees. Tubman went to work. She cooked, washed dishes, and cleaned people's houses. Now she was free. People actually paid her to work for them. But Tubman was not content to sit back and enjoy her freedom. She saved the money she earned so that she could help free others. Tubman made 19 perilous trips back to the south, ignoring her own danger in order to become a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She guided escapees from one safe resting place to another. A station on the Underground Railroad was usually an abolitionist's home or something. Sometimes it was a church or another safe resting place. Some of the stations had secret rooms to hide the escapees. Sometimes they rode from place to place in wagons with false bottoms, secret compartments that hid them. In 1850, the United States passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which made it a law that the northern states had to return any escapees to their enslavers. Now Tubman had to conduct her passengers all the way to Canada to find freedom. Do you know? People working in the Underground Railroad used code words. Freight meant escapees. Stations were safe houses or other places to stay. Conductors were the people helping the enslaved people escape. Lines were the routes north to freedom. How she did it. Many called Tubman a master of disguise. Sometimes she dressed as an old woman, and sometimes she disguised herself as a man. It is said that one day she met one of her former enslavers and he didn't recognize her. Tubman was clever in other ways. She hired men to rip down wanted posters that described escapees. Runaway notices weren't put in newspapers on weekends, and they had to wait until Monday morning. Tubman began escapes on Saturday nights in order to have a head start. If Tubman saw people she thought were hunting for escapees, she'd turn and go south to make it look as though she was not trying to escape. If the escapees wanted to turn back, she forced them to keep moving north to freedom. She boasted that she never lost a passenger. Enslavers were furious and they offered a reward for Tubman's capture, dead or alive. The reward was $40,000, an enormous amount of money for that time. One day, Tubman overheard a man reading her own wanted poster, which describes her as not being able to read. She immediately pulled out a book and pretended to read it, and the man left without giving her a second look. Tubman helped many of her own relatives get out of the South. Thanks to her, 6 of her 10 brothers and 6 sisters escaped. And on one difficult journey, she brought her elderly parents north to Canada. In total, Tubman led about 300 enslaved people north to freedom. Nothing was more important to her than helping others become free. One famous abolitionist, John Brown, called Harriet Tubman one of the bravest persons on this continent. The end of slavery. On April 12, 1861, the Civil War began. The North and South fought each other over the right to enslave people. During the war, Tubman worked as a nurse for the Northeast Union Army. She was also a spy scouting out the Southern Army's weapons warehouses, and she continued to travel into the South to lead enslaved people north. Do you know how many enslaved people escaped to freedom via the Underground Railroad? No one knows. While it's true that many reached the north and became free, some did not. Many escapees were discovered, captured, and returned to their enslavers. Others died while trying to flee. The exact number of Underground Railroad successes is unknown because Secrecy was so terribly important. When the Civil War ended in 1865, slavery did too. Tubman married and lived in Auburn, New York. She sold vegetables door to door. She had very little money, yet she turned her own house into a home to freed black people in need of help. She worked for their aid and education. She also fought for the right of women to vote. Harriet Tubman was in her 90s when she died March 10, 1913. She devoted her long life to freedom. She will always be remembered as a true hero.